agree that this evening's presentations have been enlightening, and I'm also sure there are many questions that you have about what has been said tonight. We've still got a few minutes left to take questions from the audience, and all of our presenters are happy to provide comment. That's in my notes, and so I'm assuring that you are. Before we take questions, I would ask that questions are general in nature about the matters discussed tonight and that personal matters or examples are not raised. And I also request that organisations, including schools, are not named. Now, we do have microphones in each aisle, so please raise your hand if you've got any questions, and I'll do my best to see. So is there anyone? Okay, thanks, Pauline.
Hi, I was wondering if there's any research done recently on the Year 7's change to high school to see whether that hump is coming earlier for bullying?
I'm not aware of any research that's being done in Western Australia about that issue specifically at this time, although there's been a great deal of care led by the Department of Education around preparing schools and giving schools ideas about ways to support young people. But when you look at the research from other states, there is a very distinct piece of data that we used to help and support the department in this change. We found that when children were in Year 7 and in high school, as compared to children who were in Year 7 and in primary school, the bullying was 20% higher. So in a secondary environment with children who are in Year 7, the potential for them to be bullied more when they're in a secondary environment than when they're in a primary environment is evident, and that's because of the structural change. So effectively, when children move in Year 8, so they are also bullied 20% higher. So the challenge we have is that children are there a year younger than they have been historically, although in other states they've been there for a long time, so it's not new. And that there are actions that can be taken, and the supports that schools provide and families provide will help those children significantly through that process.
Thank you.
I'd just like to follow on from that question, because given that there is evidence to suggest that the bullying is correlated with the transition to high school, is there evidence, particularly from the US, that says transitioning to high school a year later, when there is the associated developmental, social and emotional maturity, might dissipate that?
Really good question. I'm sorry it took me a moment to see where you were sitting. Yes, there is research in the US that says that as children get older, they are more capable of dealing with social issues than when they're younger. And so yes, it is more of a challenge for children. There's certainly evidence that when they are in a secondary environment a year earlier, that it is more challenging for them if they don't have good support. But children have been in a secondary environment at the age that we're now moving them to in Western Australia, in other countries and other states for a long time, and we have good evidence and actions that can be taken to support them. So yes, it is a challenge for WA at the moment, and I think that it's well recognised by families, by schools, by the system in the ways that children have been supported through that process. But we're not unique. This is evident everywhere. Our problem is that we move children at puberty. Whether we move them at Year 7 or Year 8, who knows why we have a structure, unfortunately, that disrupts a child's social development at a time when their social development is so fragile. So it's an ongoing challenge for us. The other issue that I think is really fundamental is that we see higher rates of depression and anxiety in children as they move through the transition. So again, providing supports, whether they move at Year 8 or Year 7, as you point out, it is a year younger, but in other states, in Australia and in other countries, again, strategies have been put in place to try and support children recognising, and I think that's the first issue, we need to recognise that this exists, and then making sure that strategies in place. The Friendly Schools program, not to promote it, but that's the one I know most about. We spent over 7 years studying something we called the Supportive Schools program. That was providing lots of ideas for schools about the actions that they should take before they transition to secondary school. And Kim Ward, who led the work in Western Australian schools around transition, used a lot of the research that we'd done to help support and design strategies for schools to support them through that process. But as adults, we need to be really acutely aware of what goes on with 12-year-olds. We need to watch them closely. they're a group that are at significant risk, and your question just highlights, and thank you for asking it, the need for us to be able to provide adequate support for that age group, wherever they are.
Any other questions? Thank you, Paula.
You've talked a lot about what we should be doing or what schools should be doing. How many schools actually are doing the Friendly Schools programme, and are there any model schools? Because having had 4 children go through primary school and some of them were bullied, I've not come across any of these strategies, and I've spoken to lots and lots of parents. And whilst it sounds absolutely wonderful, we all should be doing it, I'm wondering actually, are any schools actually doing it, and are there any model schools?
It's a great question. How many schools are addressing bullying, per se, I think is the first question, and then I'm aware of the number of schools that have picked up Friendly Schools. As we've designed the program, as you saw all those dots, I don't know if any of you noticed that there was an arrow that was pointing down. We wanted to be sure that we had a program that made a huge amount of difference before we started promoting it to schools. So we've spent probably close to 10 years studying it before we made it available for widespread distribution. But we did release it a little earlier because we had so many people coming to us saying, we've seen your results, could we have access to the schools? So systematically, our resource, as Eileen pointed out, has really only been very widely available in the last 3 to 4 years where there's training that's provided. And in that time, we have over 300 schools in Australia, so not all in WA, who've picked up the program and are at various stages of implementing the resources. We also have schools in other countries who are picking it up as well. But it requires an investment. You know, to change a complex problem, there's a lot of things that need to happen. There's not a single solution. So it requires schools, as Eileen pointed out, there's a whole series of stages that they need to go through. And schools need support. They need families who see that this is important and encourage it. So if you're interested in Friendly Schools, that's available. There are other programs that do have similar outcomes as well. I don't think they're studied as well. I'll be biased in making that comment. But having a systematic approach where children address this issue from kindergarten through to year 10 at least is really important, that it's formally taught, that there is a culture within the school environment that actively discourages it, that teachers know the sorts of actions they should be taking when they see a child who's being bullied and act on it quickly is absolutely key. And we hope that as we get a chance to continue to talk more about the results we have from this research, that schools will be motivated to take more action, whether they choose Friendly Schools or not. That's obviously their decision, but to see that you can change it. And if I could just close, I'm sorry, I'm answering this too long. But in schools that were very similar, we've studied this in hundreds of schools, as I've mentioned, schools that were very similar in demographics, so same SES, similar size, similar issues that were going on within the community. Schools that had a culture and an attitude that says, we don't tolerate this in our school, and these are the actions that we're taking, and this is the process that we're going to go through. We saw significantly less levels of bullying in those schools compared to schools that were demographically matched. So I think what's encouraging is that it can be changed, and we can reduce bullying significantly when schools take a systematic approach. The challenge is helping schools to do that because they're such busy places.
Thanks, Donna. Any other questions? Sorry. All right, sorry. Missed you. Sorry, we've got just one here and then, yeah.
Okay, me first.
Yeah, sorry.
Thanks. At the risk of stirring a hornet's nest, I've worked with the kids off and on over the years, and one of the things that did come to my notice was that the bullies themselves often don't get support at home. It's all very well saying that the parents should look out, they should try and help their child if the child is a bully, but often these children come from a very broken background. What can we as third party, as parents of our own children, do to help these other children in the case where you can see that they have an issue without infringing on their own parents and their own social area?
Great, absolutely great question. We have a study at the moment. It's in its 3rd year and it's called Beyond Bullying. And the focus of this study is on children who engage in bullying regularly, so chronically engage and have continued over a number of years. And our purpose in doing this is that as we've been testing the Friendly Schools program, the area we've been least successful in is changing the behaviour of children who bully all the time. Now, as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, children who bully have as many mental and social health harms from their behaviour as they do from as children who are being targeted. And we have really tried to encourage schools to see bullying as a health issue as well as a discipline issue. That children who bully are hurting and they have some serious issues that they need help with. And so if we only punish them, if we only give them consequences and to try and stop them from that behaviour, it's a very short-term, short-sighted solution. There must be consequences because children must understand that the behaviour is inappropriate and that it can't continue, but there needs to be scaffolding and support to show young people how to behave differently. So in our current study, we found that 50% of the children who bully have no capacity for empathy for their target. So they love babies, they love kittens, but the person they're targeting, they don't feel for how they're feeling. So many schools use an empathy-based approach. So if you just knew how much you're hurting this child, that might help you change your behaviour. And for half the kids, that does work. But for the kids who are chronically engaged, they actually benefit a lot from bullying. They perceive that they benefit a lot. So we're testing a technique called motivational interviewing. And what that does is to get behind the motivation. So what are young people enjoying about the bullying behaviour? And how can we show them ways to get that enjoyment, whether it be social status, whether it be power, whatever their motivation is, and they're the two primary reasons we're hearing. How can we help them also get that? And part of the discussion is most young people who we consult with and interview say that they recognise that their bullying and the friendships they have from it, which is why they largely do it for social status, are a house of cards. They recognise that if they stop their bullying behaviour, they're fearful that their friends will move away, but they don't know how to deal with it. They don't know how to make friends in other ways. So this research is saying in the Friendly Schools program, of course we need to discourage bullying actively and have consequences, and that's a school decision what those consequences are. But we also need to help these children so they don't persist. Bullying's intergenerational. Children who bully are adults who bully, who are parents who have children who bully. If we don't stop this pattern of behaviour by showing young people how to behave differently, it will continue to persist. And I want to assure you we're working our tail off to try and find out what are the best techniques to help these kids learn to behave better. And I've spoken too long when Eileen would have much to add. Or, would you guys like
we've just about to the end, but there's just just time for one last question. Thanks,
just a really quick one to the question before. What percentage of those 300 schools who've implemented this Friendly Schools program are high schools? Is there a big uptake amongst the primary schools? I guess that's all wondering.
Yeah, great question. I'm sorry that I'm answering all the questions. If any of you would like to. I really didn't want to answer the questions because Neve and Sam know so much about this issue from young people. But in terms of high school versus primary school, you saw in the yellow diagram when that the worst time, more children are bullied and more children bully around 10 or 11 years of age than any other time in their life. So primary school is fundamental. Our research started with that age group to say what can we do to kind of ameliorate that hump. So primary schools tend to take up the program much more frequently than do secondary schools because a lot of more children are bullying, so it's more urgent to try and address that. In secondary schools, the bullying decreases. There's a hump, obviously, when they move from primary to secondary school, but then it actually decreases quite significantly. But there's these children who have been chronically targeted and children who are chronically engaged in bullying who largely persist. So that's why in a secondary environment, the focus needs to be perhaps much more acutely on children who've established a behaviour pattern, who have a neural pathway that's just getting them to behave that way again and again, which is why this study Beyond Bullying is in secondary schools, primarily to test will it work with older kids. Adolescents are trickier, and when you look at the research that's being conducted in countries around the world, like the Kiva program in Finland and really successful programs, I'd like to say like our Friendly Schools program, all of them have had less success in secondary environments than in primary, and largely because they haven't focused on the source of the problem. Most of them have focused on supporting the child who's being the target and spending less time trying to deal with the children who are engaged in the bullying. And most of them had treated bullying as a discipline problem only and not looked at it as a health problem. Let's help those kids who bully so that we can get them to change in the longer term.
Okay. Look, I'm sorry, but we have run out of time, and I'm sorry for those whom we couldn't get to. A couple of matters before we close. As I mentioned earlier, we've done a video of tonight's proceedings, and that will be available on my website by next week. We'll actually get in touch with you and let you know when that's available. As I also reminded you earlier on, or said, we'd really appreciate your feedback. There are, on the forms that we provided, there are pens in the front if you need to access those. Look, we're really fortunate to have had access to the expertise of the 4 presenters tonight, and I'd like to personally thank Professor Donna Cross, Eileen Carucci, Sam and Neve for their support of tonight. So please thank our presenters again. So in this week, National Children's Week, I very much do appreciate all of the interest that you've shown tonight in coming along and supporting our children and young people. Thanks very much.